Good evening, Brennan. Welcome to the Lodge Hope of Karachi, number 337, and our weekly lockdown lecture series. This is meeting number 80, and it's an absolute pleasure once again to welcome you all along here this Tuesday evening. Brennan, as usual, can I ask you to abide by the Grand Lodge of Scotland guidance to Zoom meetings? Please, where possible, keep your video running and having a recognisable name in the screen. If you do have bandwidth challenges, please just drop me a message in the chat box and switch your video off. That's more than acceptable. Can I also ask you to please sign our virtual tile? Apologies, it wasn't up as early as usual today, but it is now there on the Facebook page, and it would be very much appreciated by our secretary if you can do that. Thank you. Well, Brennan, this evening it's a distinct pleasure to welcome along to the faculty of lockdown speakers someone I like to think I can call a good friend, Brother Charles Stewart, a past master of the lodge that we're going to hear about. He's also the secretary of the lodge he's going to tell us about. He's currently the substitute provincial grand master of that wee province at the other side of the bridges from us here in Fife and Kinross, Provincial Grand Lodge of Edinburgh. Probably more importantly to him, he's the secretary of the Grand Lodge of Scotland Clay Shooting Association, and he's asked me deliberately to get a wee plug in for that Masonic Association. So if anybody likes getting the shotguns out and hitting the clays, Charles is the man to get in touch with. They've got their own Facebook page as well, so if you have a wee look on the Masonic Facebook pages for that association, I'm sure Charles will be very much appreciated. But to me, my day job, I've also got another connection with Charles Stewart, past master. He's Legion Scotland, Padres Campbell, gopher, dog's body, otherwise an elder of her congregation, but I do know that Karen has you running about doing lots of technical stuff for the congregation, Charles, just at a drop of a hat. But knowing the good Padre, she's got a way about her that you just can't say no. So without any further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand over the virtual floor to Brother Charles Stewart, past master of the Lodge Canongate Kilwinning, number 2, so he can share his thoughts on the history of that fine old lodge. Charles.
Thank you, Gordon, very much. And thank you, brethren, for the opportunity to talk to you this evening. First of all, start with an apology. I thought I had one of these presentations on my computer, but couldn't find it over the course of the weekend. So what you have tonight is pretty much cobbled together from a variety of sources over the last couple of days. And start by saying that on the mantelpiece in the old kitchen in the lodge, there's an inscription in Old Scots there. Tomorrow no sorrow be here. I hope that that'll be the case tonight, that at least entertain you rather than leave you with sorrow. The lodge took its start in 1677 when a petition was granted by Mother Kilwinning, and the lodge was duly formed and got going. There's little remains of our history over the first 50, 60 years or so, because that has all disappeared. And if you think of the troubled times that they were at the late 1600s, early 1700s, you could well imagine why, when folks were either on one side of the Jacobite cause or the other. And there'll be more of that later on, particularly with 1745. So say, if to share my screen now and go into some slides. So hopefully you've got a slide there. Get the right button sorted out. First of all, I'll start with a picture of our master's jewel, which is, as I understand it, is old Scots silver and with various stones in it. None of which I gather are expensive stones. They're mostly glass and crystal, but there was over 100 stones in there, and it's getting rather old, so it's about to be retired. The Warden's jewels are very, very similar in design, in manufacture, in that they are just a single column, like the arms of the square. They're just a single column, slightly different in length between the two positions. That jewel is about to be retired, as I say, because it is rather old and getting rather fragile. And you'll see that there's already some of the stones have gone astray over the years. We have a couple of luminaries in our lodge history. These are James Hogg on the right there and Robert Burns. Both of these brethren were Poets Laureates of the lodge, and we commemorate them annually with a Burns and Hogg festival instead of calling it a Burns Supper. Same sort of format as everybody else's event in the January, but it's a dual immortal memory. And it's interesting to hear the differences and similarities between Burns and Hogg, given the times that they were living in and their backgrounds. Some years ago, there was a Burns and Hogg evening when the oration was given by a Thai prince who had spent most of his days in the UK, had been schooled throughout school and university in Britain. So he was very much an Anglophile. He came up to Edinburgh, was made an honorary member on this particular evening, and gave the oration. On that evening, I came across the table plan for it not so very long ago, and you'll see the room there is set out for about 80 or so. On the occasion of the Prince in 1960, there was 150 people set into the same space, the tables set out the same sort of way, and the only major difference is that tables were narrower than used in that picture. And if you can think back to 1960, folks were still smoking sort of, unfiltered cigarettes, pipes, cigars, the lot. So it must have been quite a sort of smoky atmosphere. So mentioning the old kitchen, unfortunately, the top of the picture has cut off the inscription. But that formed the kitchen of the original house where the lodge was constructed. The property was purchased from Bailey Jack and his wife, and it formed a sort of 3-story building. I don't know what uses they had on the ground floor building of the building, but certainly this was the main room in the house, with a couple of rooms up above, which are still in use to this day by some other Masonic orders. The kist you see in front of you is quite an old affair. It dates back to the early 1700s, and we've got some interesting artifacts of a similar sort of vintage there. We've got a treacle Bible, and we've got a breeches Bible. And both are named so because of misprints or misquotes in the text, or mistranslations even, in that they, in one, there's a line that goes, there's no balm in Gilead. And balm was another word for treacle, or as a treatment at that time. And the other one was breeches, where they talk about the Adam and Eve being clothed. And it's also called a black letter Bible, and dates from 1642. And the actual line was, the verse in Jeremiah goes, "Is there not treacle in Gilead?" And the treacle had various spellings in Old English, and balm was another variation of the word. And here's a picture of the chapel in the late 1800s sometime. I don't have a date for that picture at all, but you'll see it's after electric light has come in, because of the light fitting in the center of the room there. And with the exception of the wall lights in this particular instance, either side of the Roslin picture, and I presume a couple on the far side with the on the organ side, that was all the lighting was in the lodge at that time. There are far fewer pictures on the wall these days to what you see now, but two of note would be these two here. If you can see, I'm pointing just to the right of the Roslin picture, and these were portraits of Bailey Jack and his wife, part of the deal, shall we say, that granted us the ground was that they would never be separated. So today they're only separated by the width of the Roslin picture. But the room is quite similar to that now. No curtains in there and no sort of falls over the edge of the dais. The benches have gone now, but fireplace is not in use, so I have to say. A picture you might be more familiar with, which adorns lodges left, right, and centre. Not this particular picture, because this is the one which is in the National Galleries of Scotland and is not on public display, although we have acquired a copy of it, and it hangs in the refectory in St. John Street. And I'll not go into too much detail on this because Brother Stewart has given us great detail on that and has got further detail and talks to come on that. So I'll just pass over this picture at the moment, other than just saying that to a great degree, the lodge room looks quite similar from that view underneath the portrait in this previous picture, looking across the room to where the portrait is hanging there. The view to the east in the lodge today, quite a compact wee room. We can barely seat 90 to 100 people in there, depending how closely we get all together. And so you'll quite appreciate that at the moment, with our 2-meter spacing, we were down to about 10 to 15 people if we had been allowed to have meetings. The view there with the two murals on the wall. Now, these are Trompe d'oeil murals. They are not statues sitting in an alcove. They're very much 2D. And they were painted in 1833, I'm led to believe, and cost a princely sum of, I think it was £33, which seemed to be exceptionally good value if you ramp up the value of money from 1830 to now. At the right-hand end of the wall there is a facsimile of our original charter from Mother Clothing in 1677. Turning around and looking to the west wall, to the north wall, beg your pardon, south wall. The view of the organ and the two alcoves there. Now, the alcoves represent Burns, Scott, Byron, and for some reason, William Shakespeare. To our knowledge, Shakespeare was not a Mason, so we can only attribute it to it being this sort of lodge being very active at the time of the Enlightenment and the foot-ins of men of letters. That's the only sort of connection I could put to it at all. And on the left-hand side there are Burns Corner with a bust of Burns, a picture of him, and a certificate showing our contribution towards fundraising for a Burns mausoleum. And I'm not sure if that's the one in Ayr or the one in Edinburgh on Carlton Hill. in some ways, the highlight of the room in the west wall there, two religious paintings of unknown origin. One is the Adoration of Magi, apparently, and the other one is Circumcision of Christ on the right-hand side. And we only know that because the priest figure in the center of the picture is holding a rather ungainly looking knife, and there's a baby child more or less in his lap. But the main view is of the alcove there, which was painted in 1977, and it commemorates Sir Alec Buchan, not Sir Alec Buchan, Alec Buchan, the right-hand side of the picture, who was a past Secretary of the Lodge, past Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, and past Grand Secretary of the Royal Order of Scotland. It shows in the centre left there, it shows King David speaking with his architect, and in the background, the gable wall of the Holyrood Abbey. And the abbey came about because King David had been hunting. There was he fell, was about to be gored by a stag, and a white cross, a holy cross appeared and frightened the stag off. He had a dream later that night, and in the dream he was told to build an abbey. So he's got the king speaking with his architect. There's some craftsmen put here who are surrounded by the working tools and plans, and you can identify that there's a master mason there and an apprentice there. Unfortunately, I haven't got a better, I do have somewhere a better picture of that, but not, couldn't find it for tonight. Arrayed around the sort of audience, shall we say, around the edges there, are various members of the lodge in times past. So there's Lord Elcho, I think it might have been, and certainly Burns Scott, who, although not a member of the lodge, was a Mason, member of Lodge 36, there's a couple of others whose names escape me right at the moment, but they're indicative and representative of the Age of Enlightenment with their powdered wigs. The columns along left and right side illustrate the noble orders of architecture, Ionic, Corinthian, Composite, etc. There's some Masonic illustrations within the sort of side panels there, relating to various bits of our ritual. And interestingly, down at the bottom left-hand corner, we, at the close of our meetings, adjourned to some harmony. So there's a sort of allegory to wining and dining there with a tray of wine. And alongside that, there's a 50 pence piece being painted on. And the story goes that when Lord Elgin came along to unveil this mural in 1977, which coincided with the 300th anniversary of the Lodge, he had to pay his 50p entrance like everybody else, and asked that be recorded in the painting. I've never had an opportunity to ask him face to face if that was true or not, but it's nice one of these additional legends that we have incorporated from time to time. There's a bit of detail. Sorry, it's a bit fuzzy, but you can see the workmen there with the working tools and plans, and a rough ashlar and a smooth ashlar alongside them, and a figure representing the Enlightenment as a sort of thinker sort of position, and the king and his architect. And just at the top of the picture, they're just leaning over a cowan or eavesdropper. A cowan being someone of a lesser trade who didn't have the secrets of a mason and was wanting to log in to find out what he could, so he could pass himself off as a mason. And our first Grand Master Mason, member of Canongate Kilwinning, he was the hereditary Grand Master of the Masons in Scotland, and resigned his position when the Grand Lodge of Scotland was formed in 1736. There is a line of thought that he renounced that because he didn't have any family, and the hereditary element of the title would die out with his passing. So at least this maintained a connection for the Sinclairs for some time. And there's quite a story attached to his joining the lodge and being made Grand Master Mason, which Canongate Kilwinning was one of the lodges that was instrumental in getting the lodges together to form a Grand Lodge. There's about 100 at that time in Scotland, and all were contacted, and some sent representatives or sent proxies, and the rest, as I say, is history. The Schnetzler organ, which is very much the focal point on the south wall of the chapel, it was constructed by Schnetzler in 1760s. It's of a type played by Handel when he was in London. We have no evidence to suggest that it actually had been played by Handel or any other famous musician of that period. The trademark of Schnetzler at that time was that the keys on the keyboard were reversed in color. Otherwise, it's about 3-4 octaves long. It's hand pumped across on the right-hand side there. There's a lever that you've got to pump up and down. And just to the left-hand side of that gap, there's a wee gauge that you've got to keep the float in at the right sort of level. Otherwise, you get no sound. It's just as simple as that. There's, I believe there's a swell that you can use with your knee if you're playing the organ. And if there's nobody there to pump the organ, you can pedal like fury, because there's 2 pedals in front of the seat there. But it's still very much in playing order. Dr. Dennis Townhill, who was our organist for a number of years, recorded a tape some years ago of music for Masonic occasions, and it really is quite a nice, sweet sound to sit and listen and relax to. We are having some thoughts of having that transposed onto some digital format now, since tape cassettes are very much not found about these days. Over time, the lodge has had quite a variety of members, and just as the signal come up, seeing my connection's unstable. Quite a number of members, some of whom have been members of the lodge, others have been honorary members, and some are displayed here. Top left-hand corner, General Lord Hague, who was made non member in 1923, and I've got the billet for that occasion, and it is signed in his name. The figure below him, in the bottom left there, is Walter Lorraine Brodie, who was initiated into the lodge in the early 1900s, was an officer in the HLI, and he was awarded both the MC and the BC in the course of World War I, and was killed in action in August 1918. When he'd got the VC some months before he was killed, and when he wrote home to his parents, he just said that there had been a bit of trouble, but nothing to worry about. He'd actually sort of gone forward and attacked a machine gun nest. the I've forgotten the term, Gordon, the award of the medal. It says for conspicuous gallantry near Beckelor in Belgium on the 11th of November 1914, including the enemy out of a portion of our trenches, which they had several of the enemy and thereby relieved the dangerous situation. Brodie's promptitude, or by Brodie's promptitude, 80 of the enemy were killed and 51 taken prisoner. And so he was some laddie. One of the members we're not too keen on mentioning from time to time is the next one on the right at the top there, Deacon Brodie, who was by day a very fine, upstanding citizen. He was a very accomplished craftsman, making cabinets and so on. But in the course of his day job, he would acquire the keys to properties and then break in overnight and would steal property from people. He ended up absconding from Edinburgh. He was found on the continent, brought back and hung up. And then there's a story attached to that he wore a steel collar to try and get the better of the jib, which he had constructed himself, apparently. But he was hung just a few hundred yards away from the lodge in the Canongate. I haven't got the caption as to who the gentleman below him was with the hat and cane. But in the centre there is Peter Williamson, who's quite an interesting story. He was, as a young laddie in Aberdeen, was grabbed by some ne'er-do-wells, taken to America and sold off as a slave. He had quite a time as a slave. He won his freedom. His slave owner sort of nurtured him for a time, and then when the slave owner died, he went off west to make his fortunes. Fell in with Indians. Was on the good side and the bad side of Indian history in many ways, and was scalped on one occasion, apparently. He eventually got his way back to the UK, worked his way up through the country with the aim of getting to Aberdeen to sue the people who had caused him to be taken as a slave, because it was felt that some of the merchants and council in Aberdeen were complicit in the slave trade. However, he stopped off in Edinburgh. He created a coffee shop, which was quite popular. He was instrumental in organising a penny post sort of thing before the advent of Sir Rowland Hill and other elements of postal history. And it's reputed that his party piece to raise funds when he came to the lodge was to take his wig off to show where his wounds were from when he'd been scalped. The gentleman to the right of that, again, I haven't got a mention for him, but I think the picture below that is the Thai prince, who in 1960 had done the oration to Burns and Hogg. Top right, though, is an interesting one. He was one of the ones that was expelled from the lodge. He was John Murray of Broughton, who had been very much on the side of Bonnie Prince Charlie, had been his Secretary of State, and was very much confident of Bonnie Prince Charlie throughout the 1745 rebellion. He accompanied him throughout until after Culloden. He was captured and taken to trial and turned king as evidence. And so by his evidence, it helped to seal the fate of some of the Jacobite supporters, including a couple of Grand Master Masons, one of whom was put to death. Another was exiled to live in England to live out his days in England, and I think that was the Earl of Cromarty. It was that, so he couldn't get any further north than the River Trent, apparently. And below that, we've got Rudyard Kipling, who was made an honorary member of the Lodge. And we have in our possession a letter from him. Thank you, Alexa. We have a letter from him saying thanks for us making him an honorary member. And likewise, we have communication from gosh, his name's going out of my head too. Lord Kitchener, who had been made an honorary member too. One of our members in the past was a gentleman by the name of Wallace Bruce, who at that time had been the American consul in Edinburgh, and it's to him that we should be thankful for the statue in the Carlton Cemetery for Abraham Lincoln. And he was very much a Burns fan, and he bought and owned the original manuscript of the Brown-Eyed Lassie, and he was very much into writing poetry himself, and was created a Poet Laureate of the Lodge as well, and sent this wee poem on one occasion to arrive with us just before the Burns and Hogg of the late 1800s. Leaping into the middle of this century, from 90-something years ago, the 250th anniversary of the Lodge, with the Master and Office Bearers there, and at the right-hand end, the Tyler resplendent in his red waistcoat, which was still about by the time I joined the Lodge in 1980, but was worse the wear. As you can see here, it was still in use some 25 years later, when we had the 350th, so the previous one's 375th. This was the 300th anniversary of the Lodge, and 6 of those brethren there are still with us today. And I was able to know a lot of them at that time, from 1977. The symbol of the Canongate, harking back to King David and the deer with the Holy Cross. And so that is the emblem of the Canongate. And if you go down to Canongate Kirk, you will find that there is a set of antlers above the door on the gable wall, just sort of like that. And those have come from the apparently from the Balmoral estate, and are regularly refreshed and gilded and put on display. Walter Lorraine Brodie, and on the centenary of his death in 1918, we laid a wreath at the site of his family home in just off of Queensferry Road. The cemetery just nearby, Dean Cemetery, has the graves of his parents, and he's recorded there, although he's buried in Belgium. Another soldier that we had was Brother Halswell, who was likewise an officer in the HLI and a very keen runner, and to the extent of competing in the Olympics. He won the gold medal in 1908 because at that time in the 100-yard sprint there were no lanes, so you just run anywhere you like. And one of the American runners ran in front of him and impeded Halswell, and so prevented him from winning the race. There was a photograph taken apparently which showed progress. So he was disqualified from the race, and the American, well, the race was about to be rerun, and the other American runners refused to run. So Halswell ran the race alone and won the gold medal. He was quite a chappy, and he was killed in action in 1915 in the war. He was one of about 6 HLI officers who joined in the early part of last century. For my sins, photograph of me along with Arthur Mitchell, who is my opposite number in we're both the proxy junior and senior warden of the Lodge Civil and Military in Hamilton, Bermuda. And that, brethren, is all I've got there for you by way of photographs. Going back to some of these other guys here and so on. One of the ones we mentioned might even be Sean Trell, top right-hand corner there. Sean Trell was a teacher of French, member of the Lodge, secretary of the Lodge as well. But his wife died, and there was something strange that was felt. So her body was exhumed, and they found that she'd been poisoned, and he was responsible. So he was hung up at the Carlton jail after due trial and process, and was similarly expelled from the Lodge. And from either Sean Trell or Brodie, there's some discussion as to which one was perhaps the example for Robert Louis Stevenson to get an inspiration for the strange story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, having some dual activities. And I think, brethren, that's all I have for you at this point. I'm just looking at what notes I have. So, no, I'm happy to take any questions if anybody.
Charles, before we open it up to questions, can I just say on behalf of everyone who has been watching and listening to you this evening, thank you so much for a very unique insight into the history of Lodge Canongate Kilwinning number 2. You said at the top of the show that you just pulled together these slides at the weekend from a variety of photographs that you just had lying around. Well, sir, can I commend you on the knowledge and the stories behind those photographs that just happened to be lying around. It really brought the story and the history of the Lodge to life, and I think we're all very grateful to you. And I would say at this stage, for any brother who is on the meeting this evening who's not been to St John's Chapel in Edinburgh, I would really encourage you to take the opportunity to visit. If you don't get to number 2, there's a variety of other lodges that do meet there, but it is certainly one of those bucket list Masonic buildings to visit, Brian. So Charles, let's just quickly scroll down to see what questions we've got. Ian Walk commenting, but we didn't smoke until after the toast to the Queen. Well, you didn't get to smoke at all nowadays. So it's went full circle from being really smoky. Alan Keegan, the loyal toast, Ian. I think you maybe have a long time to wait for a fag in 1677. Ian Gunning, past Master George Docherty of Canongate Kilwinning number 2's Mother Lodge is my affiliate lodge, St Convol Giffnock, 1359. We had the honour of being present in February 2020 when I was privileged to present him with his 60-year diploma on behalf of his Mother Lodge, along with the Provincial Grand Lodge of Edinburgh. Hopefully we'll get the chance to visit again soon. Brother Charles was responsible for letting us know about that special occasion. I think it's Dougie Filan, because I'm only getting Douglas P coming up, asks, fascinating presentation, Charles. What was the connection with Rudyard Kipling to make him an honorary member?
Good question. I don't know. other than he'd been acknowledged he was a Freemason, and just a well-known person at the time. I came across mention of somebody else in the last couple of days and found that this other brother had been made an honorary member of number 1, and then sort of almost months later he was made an honorary member of number 2. And in previous talks and these occasions, we have heard of that happening to other folks. So I really couldn't tell you. I don't know. Worth a look through the minutes for that time, because he wrote the letter when he was up at the manse in near Mural, north of Mural, near Golspie, somewhere Bonar Bridge, and I forget just which bit of his works he was working on at the time.
Charles, I'll just add to that for the Bern. One of the lessons that I've learnt during my researches over the lockdown period, when I was looking at the various VC holders, and if I made mention that they were an honorary member of number 1, the lesson I learned from Charles's good offices, when he politely chastised me and he reminded me that they were also a member of honorary member of number 2, and it certainly seems to be if number 1 made them an honorary member, number 2 did, and I think vice versa. If number 2 did it first, number 1 would follow. Alan Keegan comments, a fascinating presentation, Charles. And he's got a question. Why did the Lodge retain the Kilwinning designation? I thought they might have been on the side of the Grand Lodge during the Stushy.
I think it's just harked back to our roots, that we were granted the charter by Mother Kilwinning. And, you might say all these other Kilwinning lodges that are about from those very early days, they've still retained their names.
Okay, thank you.
Don't know.
And I think, Charles, anyway, Stushy, what a great word, isn't it? I'm not sure if it's spelt with a CH or an SHIE or whatever, but it's a great word anyway. Michael Hearn comments, Kipling was a member of an English Constitution craft lodge in Pakistan. And I think that might be Hope and Perseverance, if memory serves me correctly. Ken Wallace, my late father, Douglas Wallace, was initiated into number 2 in November 1957. And I remember as a child attending Christmas parties there. Excellent presentation, many thanks, and no doubt many fond memories brought back to you, Ken, this evening from Charles. Possibly just before that 50 pence was painted on as well, those Christmas parties, maybe 5 or 6 years earlier. Bob Potter, congratulations, brother Stewart, very enjoyable talk. Are the figures on the top of the columns FHC? Do you have a use as a first degree tracing board?
Sorry, Bob, just...
So are the figures on top of the columns Faith, Hope and Charity? Do you have and use a first degree tracing board?
No, we don't use a first degree, only a second degree tracing board do we have. We don't use a first or third.
Michael Hearn also comments, Kipling was also responsible for the founding of the Builders of the Silent Cities Lodge in Omar in France. And there is a lodge in London by that name as well.
All right.
Robert Clark was HLI stationed in Edinburgh at the time, as they not were a Glasgow regiment. Yes, they are tend to be a Glasgow regiment, but I think at that time they were taking people from anywhere, because I've got a lovely photo from Markinge where HLI were parading up Black Watch territory to the railway station, and you wouldn't think HLI would be recruiting in Fife, but they certainly were as well. So I just think they were all in it. Aubrey over in Chile, apologies for joining late. He's had visitors, but he'll watch you, Charles, on the YouTube later on this evening. Alan Keegan, I note that Kipling's books are currently published by Canongate Publishing in High Street, Edinburgh.
No connection to us, unfortunately.
And I think the other comment that I would make, Charles, for those who are members of the Royal Arch, it's also worth a visit for what you've got in the building as well, around
Yes, absolutely.
the Royal Arch, which is generally hidden away in the offices of the Royal Order of Scotland. So it's one of those really secret Masonic secrets, if you can get past the door of Alan Dixon to open up the little secret cubby hole behind them. But the old adage goes, if you don't ask, you don't get. So if you're ever visiting, ask to have a look at that wee room as well.
When I first went about the lodge, I was engaged as a bar steward from one pals from college days, became my proposer some time later. And the wee store that I used for looking at taking care of the booze supplies was in adjacent space to that. And I remember pushing the door open one day and just marveling at it, and long before I knew anything about any of it. And it's just a sight to behold.
Yeah, it was one of those buildings, Brian, that I've said it already this evening, you really should try to get a visit, but not maybe just at a meeting. Go through the day and ask one of the staff to give you a little tour into the nooks and crannies. Stewart comments, and we know Stuart's love of number 2. He's an honorary member there, and he's done a lot of research into it with his good pal Pat Given. And he comments, the figures are secrecy and light of masonry, and I think that's in the west wall alcove. Most interesting. Well done, Charlie. Bob Kerr, very interesting talk, Charles.
On the alcoves above the doors at east and west, beside the warden's chairs. I'll just get a picture back to that if I can.
When you're doing that, Nobby, my immediate past acting secretary, H. Lai was his granddad's regiment from 1912. He was from Leith and was part of the British Expeditionary Force in 1914. And that was at a time when Leith wasn't part of Edinburgh. It probably still isn't part of Edinburgh, depending where you come from, Nobby. And
a lot of our history was when the Canongate was a separate borough to Edinburgh, so we had our own arrangements here. So that was a different place up there. I'll just show you that picture looking towards the west wall, and the 2 figures that Stuart's just identified for you.
That's it coming up now.
There. Okay.
Well, Charles, once again, on behalf of the Lodge Hope of Cratchie and all our guests here this evening, and those who will watch on YouTube in the coming weeks and months ahead, thank you so much for this very enlightening presentation into your mother lodge. It was very much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Brethren, next week, for your delights and for your daily advancement, we have Brother Christopher Earnshaw coming along to speak to us about Freemasonry in China. Brother Earnshaw is a member of the Grand Lodge of Japan. He's their past Grand Lodge historian. He's quite an interesting character, and I'll share his web page with you next week. But he will be joining us next Tuesday evening, same place, same time. And so, as ever, you're all extended a very warm welcome. Brian, at this time, please feel free to unmute yourself, give your big congratulations and thank yous and your good nights to each other. Please unmute yourself, Brian.
Thank you very much, Charles. It was excellent. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
That was an excellent.
Yeah, thanks very much, Charles. That was superb. Yeah, really enjoyable. Really good.
Yeah, congratulations, Charles.
For putting this on again. Thank you.
Very interesting talk, Charles.
Excellent, Charles. Well rehearsed.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Charles, that was brilliant. Stay safe. Thanks, Gordon, as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Dougie.
Fantastic talks. Thank you, Gordon.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Charles. Well done. Well done. We enjoyed it.
Thanks so much indeed.
Thank you.
Well done, Charlie.
Thanks, later. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles, for the lecture. Great to know.
Thank you very much indeed, Les. Thank you.
Charles, thank you for a wonderful talk. I have to tell you, you're urging for people to go and visit. Gerard O'Donnell, Peter Clark and myself took Andrew Prescott from the ICF Cecile Reveger and Susan Mitchell-Summers round the building. So Scotland was promoted at the ICHF.
Well, in a fortnight's time, I'm going to be leading a group from Florida around, and the other day I got a letter asking if we could get a squad from Yorkshire to be shown around and attend a meeting. So that's on the back burner for the moment, whether we have a meeting by then or not. But
that's
we'll
super.
But thanks very
Thank you,
much,
Charles.
Thank you.
And I'll give you 5,
Thanks,
Bern.
Charles.
Thank you, Charles,
Thanks,
for a very
Charles.
interesting meeting. And thank
Thanks
you very
very
much, Gordon, for putting the meeting on. Take care, brethren.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Charles. Thoroughly enjoyable. Thanks, Brother Gordon. Really appreciate that.
Well done, Elkins.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
And 4,
Thank you.
Bern.
Thank you,
very
Gordon.
much, Gordon and Charles, for a very interesting talk. And Canongate holds very good memories for me because we've been in the Royal Arch. I visit the Royal Arch rooms up there regular away, and it's been exceedingly happy to see Dougie Filand here this evening. Dougie actually installed me as the Grand Superintendent of Galloway in 2018 on a day when it was very snowy and they thought they couldn't get through. And when they came, I had a big sigh of relief. And it's good to see him again. And thank you very much, brethren, for this evening. Thank you.
Cheers, Howard.
Thank you.
And 3, Bern.
Thanks again, Charles. It was a wonderful talk. Gordon, well done again. Thank you.
Thanks, Ronnie.
Good to see you, Big Forbes.
You looked
Good
like
night.
you're doing that Holy Willie's prayer there in the dark in the candlelight when you came forward there, Ronnie. Yes,
I just didn't notice his slider.
and 2, Bern.
That's how he learns his ritual in the dark.
And 1, Bern, because this might get out of hand. Once again, Brother Charles Stewart, past master number 2, Lodge Canongate Kilwinning. Thank you very much, sir, for being our guest lecturer this evening.